All right, did it with the kids, and we do it with you too. Again. Little science lesson. Here's the same magnets. Magnetism is what scientists call a strong force. Gravity is what they call a weak force. Just imagine you've got the entire Earth pulling on this thing. Earth's a pretty big place, right? And if I let it go, what's going to happen? It falls to the ground. Magnetism is relatively a stronger force. Oops, got to turn it the right way. And if I let it's a stronger force because the entire Earth, the whole Earth is pulling this thing down. But if I put this magnet here, what's it going to do? It's going to fall up. Opposites attract. Scientists know about it. It's the reason electric motors run, the generators make electricity. All that good sort of stuff. There's also that force that we call animal magnetism. That, you know, that's the attraction between men and women. And it is not there simply because we're the opposite gender all the time. Sometimes it's because people are just attracted to people that are just the opposite of them. They have different values, they have different likes and dislikes. I knew a couple in Norfolk. When I got to know them, they'd already been married for decades. And they told me a delightful story, and that was when Walter Stockberger, he preached here during the 100th anniversary. But when he was there in Norfolk, they went to him saying, "We want to get married." He knew them both, and he said, "You can't get married. You're just so different from each other. You're just opposite. It'll never work." And he said, "I really don't want to marry you." And they insisted, and they went back and forth for a while, and finally Walter gave in and married her. Well, the fun thing is that decades later, that couple loved to just tell that story and say, "See, he told us it would never last, but we made it." Married, I think, 5 decades. I think they were married 50 years before he died. This morning we're going to look at stories that have two people that are sort of opposites. And yet, even though these two people in some ways are as different as they can be, one seemingly had everything, the other had lost everything. And at the end of the story, you're going to find they still remain opposites. But the interesting thing about the story is it speaks to their relationship about God. And the thing that they were opposites about, one had lost everything, one had gained everything, except the one thing you really needed, has to do with their relationship to God and how that relationship is impacted by what they have. Their money, their wealth, their possessions. And the reality is it's an issue that just about all Christians in some form or fashion have to deal with, sometimes almost on a daily basis. You can hardly go anywhere these days without somebody stopping you at Walmart or out in front of the mall or somewhere saying, "My car's run out of gas," or "I need this, that, or the other. Can you help?" And then the question arises, what's my relationship to God in terms of helping? What am I going to do with this individual? And you also have to deal with these days, is this somebody that's trying to scam me or not? There's a lot of things that go through your head during a moment like that. And so it is an issue of faith. When I was about 14 years old, I was in a Bible study group. We were in a retreat down on the riverbank in Washington, North Carolina. I think it was the Pamlico River down there. And one evening, sitting around the campfire, we had a speaker preaching to us that just asked, you know, in a couple of years when you have a car and you're all proud of this car, and for finally the first time in your life you can drive around and show off in front of your friends and things like that, just suppose a preacher came to you and said, "I really have a need of that car. Can you give it to me for a special mission purpose?" How willing would any of you be to give up that car? And that made us all disturbed when we went home or went back to our cabins and went to bed. We were all pondering. We were all upset with the thought that something we really value might be asked of us. Well, here's two stories that get us thinking about our relationship to God. and how our relationship to our things, to our money, to our wealth, or lack of it, can impact that. We look first at Job. In the matter of just a few minutes, Job lost everything. Everything except for his wife. His wife then told him, Job, just give up and die. So I'm not sure how valuable she was to him anyway. But he lost his children, he lost his flocks, he lost his home, he lost his possessions. And then a little bit later, he lost even his health. So that we find him poor, sick, miserable, covered with dust, broken out with scabs all over his body, and he took a broken piece of pottery and he was just sitting there in the dirt, in absolute poverty, scraping the wounds on his body. And so his friends came to him, and they began to say to Job, Job, God is good. He doesn't let anything bad happen to good people. You must have sinned. So all you have to do is repent. All you have to do is tell God, I'm sorry I've sinned. And God will restore everything you've lost. And his friends really were echoing the judgment of society back then. Because back then, most everybody believed that God gave good things to good people. Well, bad things happen to bad people. And so bad things are happening in your life, you must have seen it. You hear that even now. Sometimes when a hurricane bears down on one of the cities out on the East Coast or down in the Gulf, you'll hear a preacher get on TV and say, the reason this hurricane's about to hit is because these people in this city did this, that, or the other. Well, it doesn't exactly work that way, at least in the book of Job. Job insisted back to his friends, well, I haven't done anything. And Job is right. By the way, when you look at the beginning of the book, one of the things it tells you is there was a good and upright man, honest and righteous before God. His name was Job. It's the first thing we told about him. He's a good man, hadn't done anything wrong. And twice in the conversation up in heaven between God and the prosecutor, God says to the prosecutor, have you considered my servant Job, who is a good and upright man, hasn't done anything wrong? So you're even told by God twice by the time you get to this point in the story, Job hasn't done anything wrong. Good guy. And now all this disaster's happened to him. We know he's innocent. But his life has taken a terrible turn. And then Job responded to his friends. I know I'm innocent. But I would like to hear God say that. And so if it were in any way in my power, what I would really like to do at this point is bring a lawsuit against God. Bring him into a courtroom, lay out my case before him, set down all the arguments, let God put all his arguments forth, and then let the judge. Who's going to be the judge, by the way? Can you guess? God. I mean, who's going to stand in judgment of God after all? So God's going to be the judge. But I want to lay out my case. I want God to lay out his case too. And then when we get to the end of it, I want to hear God say, you're acquitted. You're innocent of any wrongdoing. For Job, his honor was more important than his wealth, his possessions, his cattle, even his hair. But the problem for Job is that at that moment in his life, he did not know exactly where to find God. Where must I go in order to face God face to face? So that he can set things right. In his time of misery, as it is for most all of us, when we feel miserable, we wonder, where is God gone? I'm miserable and it just feels like he's not here. And Job is feeling distant from God. Where can I turn? I turn to the right, I turn to the left. I did that backwards. I look in front of me, I look behind me. Everywhere I look, I cannot find him, but I need to confront him face to face so that I can hear from his mouth the words, you go innocent. And you finally get through 39 chapters of the book of Job, and you hit chapter 40, And then it happens, and God met Job in the whirlwind and began to ask him questions. Got Job all uncomfortable when God, where were you when I put the stars in the sky? Where were you when I made the earth? Where were you when I poured out the seas and measured just the right amount of water? Where were you when I raised up the mountains? And then he gets another question. Do you feed the mountain goats? Do you do this, Job? Do you do that? All of these questions. But the interesting thing is, as you continue watching the questions, what you notice is that there's a direction to the argument God is giving. Because what he is trying to say to Job as you watch these questions is, Job, I want you to notice this creation that I have made. There are certain dangers that cannot be avoided. He asked Job, for example, Job, have you ever fed the lion cub? Well, think about what a lion cub eats. God saying, I have to feed the lion cubs every day. But in order for a lion cub to eat, what has to happen first? An animal has to die. Job, you think of creation as this ideal thing where there's nothing ever that goes wrong for people or anything else. But the reality is there are dangers built into creation. Job, did you create the day and the night? You know about nighttime. What do you not want to be doing at night? Wandering around in a strange place in the dark, because why? It's dangerous. Has been in all societies and all places. Even if you go completely away from society and go out in the middle of a jungle, you don't want to be walking around in the dark, because what might happen? There are dangerous animals out there. And he's trying to teach Job that sometimes it is not me punishing. It's just the reality of the way the world is made. That bad things can happen. But the interesting thing about this story is, God, by the way, after that, declared Job innocent. Told his friends, Job's innocent. But I'm angry at you for saying what? But throughout, Job continued to express faith. I know that if I could be face to face with God, he would declare me innocent. I know, he said, that my Redeemer lives. I know that a righteous and just man will be able to bring his case before God, and guess what? God will listen. Throughout, Job's faith never altered. We talk about the patience of Job. Patience is really not the right word, because as you read the book of Job, you will realize Job is really impatient. I want to meet God. He keeps saying over and over again to his friends, I want to see God face to face. I want to meet him. I want to bring a lawsuit. I want him right here. And as you go through the book, it seems like he gets more and more impatient. What it really is about Job that makes him special is that he has endurance. He is persistent. He is not going to give up on God. He is not going to give up on his relationship to God. Because he knows deep down inside that a righteous man will always be able to bring his case before God. And God will stand in his corner. And so, Job lost his riches, but what was truly important is that he stayed together with God. You got that other story. Oh, by the way, before I finish with Job, let me tell you, when I was in Norfolk, I had the opportunity to, with a rabbi, to teach a Jewish community center right next to one of the synagogues in Norfolk. It was an interesting experience. I was Baptist. There were some Episcopalians there. There were mostly Jewish folk there that belonged to the synagogue. And what we would do is the rabbi would go through a story in the Bible and then allow me to tell similar stories in the New Testament, stories about Jesus, and we would explore what was similar and what was different between the two faiths. Well, we got into a story that was about prayer. And one of the men there got more, an older man, he got more and more angry the longer the rabbi and I talked. believe in prayer. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in any of this stuff y'all are talking about. And the rabbi motioned to him that he was going to handle this. And I began to realize rabbis have to be these things. This man lived in Europe during World War II. And like Job, he lost everything. Every member of his family was killed by the Nazis. All of his possessions were lost. He had nothing when he immigrated to this country. And he gave up on God. See, you can lose everything. And even give up on your relationship with God. The thing about Job was he lost everything. But still trusted that God was going to be on his side. Well, go from there to a very young man. He's kind of the opposite of Job. Young man, had great wealth. Yet he sensed that there was still one thing he didn't have. I've got everything I need down here, but I don't have an inheritance up there. Notice, it's not that he wants to get anything, or earn anything up there, or do anything really for it. He wants his inheritance. He wanted to be assured that when he got to heaven, there's going to be an inheritance for him. And Jesus said, you know the law of God. You know what you're supposed to do. Do not kill, do not steal, do not commit adultery, no. And the fellow said, from my youth, I've always done those things. Even when I was a little boy, I was careful to obey God's law. And then Jesus said, you lack only one thing. Take all your possessions, sell them, give the money to the poor. And then come, follow me. Now, when I was little, I used to hear that, and I would think, boy, Jesus must have really disliked this guy to put such a heavy demand on him. Give up everything you have and follow me. But then now, you read the story and you realize you missed the verse. Because it said, when the man said, I've done all these things since I was a child, it says, Jesus looked at him and loved him. He makes this demand not because he doesn't like him, but precisely because he does love him, and he wants to give him the one thing that he still matters. And you got to listen carefully. After he says, sell everything you have, give your money to the poor, then he says something that he's only said to 12 others. Come, follow me. When Jesus first met Peter by the boat, what did he say? Peter, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Then he saw James and John. What did he say to them? He said, follow me. And then one after one, all the disciples, he would meet them and say, follow me. Got 12 of them. You know, what do we call 13? Lucky. I wasn't thinking of that direction. Yeah. Leave it to Patrick to think of food. But we think of it as unlucky. Buildings around here, you go up to the 12th floor, and what's the next floor up? 14. You leave off the 13th floor. It's just too unlucky to have one of those in the building. Jesus was about to go from 12 disciples to 13. He offered that to this man. It's a remarkable story. That throws off everything. You know, the 12 disciples for the 12 tribes, but he loved him enough that I'll break up the pattern, we'll have 13. But in this little short paragraph, Mark tells us some remarkable things. And then he gives us this remarkable irony. The man turned away sad because he was rich. And as I said to the children, we don't often associate sadness with being rich. How many people, when they won the lottery and got on TV, somebody won $200 and some million dollars a few weeks ago, got on TV, how sad did he look to you as they gave him the check? No. We don't tend to associate sadness with being rich. But Mark Mark says this man turned away from Jesus sad because he had great wealth. He knew that there was something that was lacking. But he was unable to give up other things in order to get it. He knew that he needed that relationship with God through Jesus, but he was unwilling to give up something else in order to gain it. And so he went away sad. We also have to make that decision. Sometimes we have to make that decision almost daily. And it's not just about giving up all your wealth so that you never have it again. Sometimes it's just simple decisions. Sometimes you want to just sit down in the living room and watch TV when God has called you to do something else. And you're sitting there thinking, I know there's better ways I can spend my life. But I'm going to sit in front of this TV. Sometimes when you sit down at the table, remember how your parents used to tell you there are people starving in China, there are people starving in India. One of the TV shows we were watching the other day, there was an Indian guy at the table. From India. And one said, eat all your food, there's people starving in India. And he said, I am Indian and I'm hungry. Give me a bite. But sometimes we know, even when we are overeating ourselves, that we really don't do a whole lot to help those who have not a meal in front of them. And so the call comes to us. Am I really involved in this mission? Am I really involved in the call? And like that rich man, we do what we need to do to dismiss the thought from our heads so that we can go ahead and eat that fried chicken and cheesecake and all those other things that we ought not to be eating anyway. We sometimes make the decision to put our things, that new toy that we have, before God. You remember that parable of the great wedding feast that Jesus taught? There's a big great wedding feast. A lot of people were invited. They all began to send back messages after they received the invitation. I can't come because this, that, and the other. And one of them is real interesting. I've got a new team of horses. I can't possibly come. I got to go try them out. Invited to the table with Jesus. But I can't do it. I got a new toy. I just got to try it out. We oftentimes are confronted with a choice. Do I prefer my things? Do I prefer my time as my time? When God is calling me to do something else or to share. Tough question. But the thing that the book of Job is trying to teach us, the thing that Jesus is trying to teach us in the Gospel of Mark, is that the choice that will truly bring happiness is not the choice to have more things and more toys and more food in our stomach and more time for ourselves, but to share what we have with others. Two individuals whose life stories are designed to teach us about possessions and what is truly important in life. One had everything, and yet in the end he had nothing because